Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pam Strickland. I'm the founder of North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking, and I am so glad that you're here to learn more about how to build a coalition, how to get started, if that's something that you're thinking about. So thank you for being here. I would invite you to introduce yourself in the chat box so that we can see who all's here and you can see each other. You might see a friend or someone that's close by that you want to network with. I'd invite you to put your name and the organization that you're with, if there is one, and your location. And as you do that, click on the drop-down box and be sure to click on all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your introduction and not just me. So feel free to do that. I do want to let you know that this is being recorded so that if you um, find it helpful and you want to share it with people that you're hoping might help you build a coalition, then it will be recorded and I will send it out to everyone who registered along with handouts. Most of you already have the handouts. If you had registered before this morning, I sent out the PowerPoint and a couple of handouts to you. But don't worry, if that wasn't you, if you just registered today, then I'll be sending those out to everyone. And you'll know what I'm talking about as we go through. So I am wanting this to be interactive and just be super helpful to you and to your potential coalition. So if you have questions and comments, if you would please put those in the Q&A box, and I will just stop periodically and check that out and be able to respond to whatever you have put there. So I think that's all the housekeeping. So I'm going to share my screen with you and we'll get started. So the title of our webinar today is Coalition Building 101. But I believe that the way you start or build a movement is by building a coalition. Because no matter what your issue is, there's no one group or one organization that's going to be able to address it all by themselves. They need help. We all need help. I'm going to share just a little bit with you about our organization as we get started. So our vision is a state free of human trafficking, and our mission, how we intend to accomplish the vision, is by creating communities actively working to abolish human trafficking. And so you can see in our mission, we've got the phrase creating communities. So you can tell that we are very much interested in collaboration right off the bat. Now, when we say creating communities, we don't necessarily just mean a geographic community. What we mean is any group of people. So it might be the legal community, the faith-based community, the public school community, the medical and healthcare community. So it could be any group of people that are working together that have a common cause. The 4 action items for us trying to accomplish our mission are education, collaboration, legislation, and fair trading. So we do a lot of these webinars, and usually the topic is more specifically about human trafficking. So we do general human trafficking awareness that we call Human Trafficking 101. And then we do more specific trainings for specific professional groups that might come into contact with human trafficking victims. For instance, law enforcement or school staff or social workers or healthcare professionals or hotel staff. So if you are a part of a group that might potentially come into contact with victims, and your group has not yet received that type of training, I hope that you will get in touch with me and I'll work with you to make that happen. So our second action item is collaboration. So I already mentioned that's really, really important to us. And Apparently, it's important to you too, or you wouldn't be here today. So we do know human trafficking is this huge issue and that it takes all of us to work on it. And so the purpose of today is to hopefully learn a little bit from the experience, excuse me, that I've had in starting and facilitating a coalition here in Pitt County. But to take the knowledge that I've gained and to modify it and make it work for your own individual community. The third thing is legislation. So we are very interested and educated about and try to stay involved with both state and federal legislation by being in touch with our legislators. Um, and the last one is fair tradings, which hopefully some of you are familiar with, a fair trade certification. And that means that an item with that certification is slave free, child labor free, means that the person who made or harvested that product was paid a fair living wage, no matter what country they are in. So I see that we have a question before I get started. So let's see. Would like to know what coalitions would be able to assist us with so we can all benefit from one another. So hopefully, as we go through, we'll learn more about the coalitions that different ones of us are involved with and how we can work together. So great comment. So today, what we're going to talk about is, of course, first of all, what is a coalition? What makes one effective? Who should be involved in your coalition? And how do you keep members engaged? So that is the $100,000 question, because everybody is at the beginning interested and involved and excited. And how do you keep that momentum going? That's a key. So what is a coalition? It's a group of individuals or organizations with a common interest who agree to work together toward a common goal. Now, I want to point out something here. It doesn't say here it's a group of individuals or organizations that agree on everything and are working on a goal, right? So, something to be real clear on is, of course, what issue the coalition is going to be working on, and leave everything else outside the door. Do not let the things that your coalition members differ on distract you from staying on target and staying focused on what it is that you are supposed to be working on as a coalition. So things that could distract you might be political issues, politics in general, religious things, local controversies about various things. And I would just strongly urge you to keep those things out of your coalition meetings and focus on what it is you're supposed to be focused on. As my pastor always says, be sure the main thing is the main thing. Um, So I thought it might be interesting, just as we're getting started, to find out what coalitions some of you all are involved in. And if you put that in the chat box, that would be great. And again, be sure to click on the drop down box and click on panelists and attendees so everyone can see. And I've given just a couple of examples here that some of you might be involved in. The North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault and the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking. Those are two organizations that our nonprofit is a member of, as well as the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I mean, there's a lot of them. And of course, it does not have to have the word coalition in it. So any coalition that you're a part of, either as an individual, maybe a professional coalition, or that your nonprofit is part of, please put that in the chat box. Great. So let's see. Folks who are members of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Coalition Against Human Trafficking. Great. Wonderful. So Now I'd like for you to put in the chat box, what are some things that you like about these coalitions that you are a part of? What is the reason you're involved with them? When you are able to go to meetings, what is it that prompted you to actually have that meeting on your calendar and go to it? Why did you attend, or why were you unhappy when you couldn't attend? I mean, what is it that you liked about it? And please put that in the chat box for me. There we go. Me and this thing are. Some of y'all must be shy. This is intended to be an interactive webinar, so I hope that you'll share with us. But I do see we've got one person that says, I love working with them because it's a genuine need to help and feel there's things missing in our fight right now. Okay, so um, you want to help. Well, thankfully, I have a list of things that people have said they enjoy working with coalitions. And here we go. So having the right people engaged on a particular issue, basically, again, coming together around one particular issue and having the right people there, having shared knowledge. And this can be important too, because, and I want to speak specifically about having the shared correct knowledge. Um, i- in the human trafficking movement right now, having correct information out there can be hard because there are actually organizations out there and individuals who are posting misleading information, for instance, on social media. And that can make it hard for a coalition or any nonprofit that's trying to be out there sharing good information about what human trafficking is and what it looks like. So back in the summer when all this misinformation was all over the internet, our coalition, well, our nonprofit actually created a handout that had, the misinformation that was out there on social media, and then an appropriate response to that if you were to see it on social media, because we believed that it was important to not just overlook it because we need to get the right information out there. So our nonprofit created a handout and shared it with our coalition and asked them to share it on social media and to share it with their employees and volunteers and staff so that we can, as a coalition, be sure we're getting the correct information out there. A shared passion. So it's certainly fun to be with a group. Sometimes back when we could go to events, I would say, oh, it's such a good feeling to be here in a room with these people. This is my tribe. They have the same passion that I do. And that can be real comforting when you feel like in your real life, your everyday job, that you're out having to convince people that human trafficking really is a problem and here's what it actually looks like. And no, it's not always about kidnapping. It's usually somebody and those kinds of things. So it's nice to be, in a group of people who share your same passion and understand your issue. Having a clear purpose is another thing people like about coalitions, that you all know why you're there. Training is an important thing that coalitions can offer, whether that is at your monthly meetings or quarterly meetings, however often you meet, or whether you have specific webinars you offer or conferences, that kind of thing that the coalition offers. Um, our local coalition, the Pitt County Coalition Against Human Trafficking, believes that training is an important part of what we do. And that doesn't always mean, an hour-long training or a 2-hour training. It can be, 10 minutes of this law just got passed, and here's how it's going to impact you and the clients you serve, um, the human trafficking clients you serve. So it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out training all the time, but sharing information. People who think like me, and that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about kind of feeling like that the people in this coalition, in this group, are your tribe. People you like and enjoy being around. I will say that for our Pitt County Coalition, back when we could meet, um, we meet monthly, and the people enjoyed being around each other. So before and after the meetings, there are little clusters all over where people are just talking and catching up and just enjoying fellowship and network time. Sharing resources can be hugely important for coalition members, and that's an important part of what ours does. When our direct service providers mention a need, and we encourage them to do that at our coalition meetings, very often another member can meet that need. I remember last winter, we had a human trafficking case manager say that she was working with a client who had children, and they just come out of a trafficking situation, and it was getting cold, and none of them had winter coats. Well, another member said they had done a coat drive, and they had way more than they could use for their clients, and that they could assist with that. Um, that's happened with diapers and formula, and um, one of our members is Legal Aid of North Carolina, and so when we've had um, case managers or social workers mention a legal issue that a human trafficking victim has, legal aid has been able to help. So sharing resources can be a tremendous benefit of a coalition. Social media presence, that might not be an obvious one, but I think especially in this time when we're all spending more time on the computer, that can be an important thing. That people can enjoy about a coalition, that when they go on their social media, and they go to the page of a coalition that they're in, and that they see these posts that are relevant to them, to their jobs, to their interest, and often something that they can share, or information that they need to know about a meeting coming up or an event or a training, that the social media can be an important piece of what a coalition does. The meetings themselves can be a positive aspect. And we'll talk about that. But, for a coalition meeting to be something that people consider positive, of course, it has to be well run. And that's something that we'll talk about as we get a little bit further along. If you decide you do need a coalition, then what does that need to look like? So one thing I strongly encourage is consistent meeting times. That you know don't don't count on me to try to figure out when you're meeting every month or every quarter. Give me a consistent time so I can put it on repeat on my calendar, and I know what time it is every month or every quarter. um, I think that's really important. And one way that attendance is impacted is when you don't have a consistent meeting time. Another thing is having it start on time. People are busy, and they do not like having their time wasted. And if they make the effort to get to a meeting on time, you need to start it on time. And the people who are late, this is a pet peeve. So you start on time, and then someone comes in 15 minutes late, and you decide to kind of start over for them. I'm not saying we should punish them in any way. They can come in and let them join, but you don't stop and waste everybody else's time catching them up. You say, "Oh, we're glad you're here. Um, we can catch you up after the meeting." I think one of the things that makes people come back to a coalition meeting is if they learn something, make it worth their time. having good speakers. So we don't necessarily have a speaker every month. We do most months. And if we don't have a speaker, the months that we don't have a speaker, then we have like a specific topic that we're going to discuss among the group. But having speakers that are relevant to the issue and that they want to hear from. So our Pitt County Coalition is actually having a speaker that many of you may know. Our meeting is tomorrow, and I have invited Tracy Klein from True Justice International to speak to us. They are in Newbern and Jacksonville, and our coalition's in Pitt County. So their nonprofit, their services are actually one of the closest to us, and they are definitely the closest safe house to us. So Tracy's going to come and share with our coalition members the services that their safe house offers, and if what are the criteria for having a client come there. What is the referral process? So, I mean, this is going to be valuable information for the people in our coalition that serve trafficking victims, and that's important. Some coalitions serve food. Ours does not, except usually in our December meeting we do. And of course, we're meeting virtually, so not this time. But for, if there's a tradition at a particular coalition of serving food, um, that might be important to that group, or it might be a way to get people there to serve food. Sending out email reminders about the meetings and following up afterward. And I I can't stress those two things enough. We, with the Pitt County Coalition, I send out several emails a month, but trying not to overload them. But on the week that our coalition meets, which is this week, like I said, the Monday of that week, I send out an email that says, we're meeting Thursday at 9:30. Here's the Zoom link. Here's who our speaker is going to be. Just kind of to remind people, if it's not already on their calendar, get it on the calendar. And at that time, I'll say, if there are any of you that have events coming up or have handouts you want to share, or resources you want to share, get that to me so that I can put it all in one Google folder, and I'll send the link out on Thursday. And so that on Thursday morning, 7:30, 8 o'clock, I send out another email, and it's got the Zoom link, and it's got a link to a folder that's got the agenda and handouts that we'll be discussing during the meeting. That has worked well for us. Every once in a while, I'll ask the members, "Hey, is that too many emails?" And they're like, "No, we need the reminder." So that has worked well for ours. And then it's super important to follow up afterwards with, if you're not formally organized, you may not want to call them minutes. They may just be notes from the meeting. But that's really valuable to the people who were there, but it's especially valuable to your folks who weren't there, so they can read through the notes and see what it is that they missed, and see if there's anything that they feel like they need to follow up on or learn more about from your meeting. So these are some things that people like about coalitions. These are things that make them continue to initially get involved and continue to stay involved. So those are some things we like. Let's talk for a minute about why coalitions were created. So we only had two mentioned, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence and the Coalition Against Human Trafficking, but I'm sure that all of you are probably members of other coalitions as well. Would you share in the chat box, why were they created? What was the original purpose in creating these coalitions? So Odette says the need to get out information. and to solve a problem. I think that's key, both of those. Usually there's a problem that the coalition is trying to solve. And one of the first steps usually in solving any problem is to get information out there about it. So, and helping other coalitions might be a piece of it. Most coalitions, like I said, though, they need to focus on their particular issue. So when we look at why are coalitions created, what we're really saying is, what's the value of them? What do we get out of them? So very often it's to address an urgent need. So, the urgent need of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, the environment, whatever a person's particular issue might be. To obtain and provide services. Now, most coalitions that I know do not actually provide services. Usually the coalition members provide services, but that will be up to an individual coalition and how they decide to operate. To bring more effective and efficient delivery of programs. Now, that is something that the coalition might help with. They might decide to provide training so that clients receive better services, for instance. They might decide as a coalition that there's a gap in services in the community and that they need to figure out how to address that by being sure that a program is created or improved upon. An example I can give in the human trafficking world is that several years ago, the legislature passed a statute saying that all sex ed curriculums in the state should include sex trafficking awareness and prevention. Well, there was no enforcement mechanism in that. And so that really has not been done consistently throughout the state. So a local coalition might check to find out if their local school system is doing that. And if not, create a program that their different coalition members can help in delivering this curriculum to the different schools about sex trafficking awareness and prevention. So that's just an example of something they might do that would actually involve delivery of programs. I think a lot of coalitions want to create long-term permanent change, pool resources, increase communication among groups, or break down stereotypes. I think that is an important value of a coalition, and I'll give an example of that. Many times I hear as I'm out talking and training different groups that in some communities, the social worker population and the law enforcement population do not always play well together. Okay, in some communities they do, but in some they don't. And to get them in a room together and to, help them uh, see the humanity in one another and to realize that yes, we've got different roles in the community, but we are trying to improve our community can be really helpful. And that's just one example. There could be, other disciplines that also need to develop a little more empathy for one another. Revitalizing sagging energies of group members. So one way to do that, one thing we do at our meetings, and I'll be honest and say I stole it from someone else. I was at a meeting, a municipal meeting, where the person leading it, the city manager, asked the employees at the table, first thing on the agenda was good news. What is some good news? And so we started doing that at our coalition meetings, and to help us realize, yes, human trafficking is a tough issue, but we're making some headway. Here's something good that's happened. The other thing, if we're talking about just a more of a general, I don't want to use the term burnout, but people just kind of getting tired of such a heavy issue. Part of what the coalition can do is to provide training, provide resources so that hopefully they don't get to that point. And if they do get to that point, to offer some self-care training and tips. Plan and launch community-wide initiatives is something that a lot of coalitions do. Ours does that. We have two that we do every year, and of course, most groups that work with human trafficking are going to do something in January during Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and so we have a lot of activities during January. And the other month that we really focus on is November, the 19 days of prevention. And so our coalition, um, we're actually we're on what, November 18th. So tomorrow's the last day of the 19 days of prevention. So we've had an activity of some type just about every day this month. And of course, it's been interesting because it had to be virtual. And so it's the prevention of violence against children. And so we had book reads that were specifically, you know, read to children's books that we read online, Facebook Live, and that kind of thing. Um, we had interviews with groups that intersect with ours. So, for instance, we know that substance abuse is very closely related to human trafficking. And so, our community outreach coordinator interviewed the local executive director of the Pitt County Substance Abuse Coalition, and talked about the services that they offer as a part of prevention, because part of what they do is try to prevent people from developing a habit. So those are just a couple of ideas, but things that a coalition can do together, working together to get a message out. Develop and use political clout to gain services or other benefits. Our coalition has not really tried to develop political clout. I mean, we do interact with our elected officials. Part of that is during January, and one of our main initiatives for the Human Trafficking Awareness Month is that we invite every municipality in our county to proclaim January as Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And of course, we have the proclamation that we share with them. We ask them to print it on their letterhead, and we ask them to allow one of our coalition members to come to their January meeting and have the proclamation read. Sometimes they ask our coalition member to actually read it. Sometimes the mayor or someone else will read it. And present the signed proclamation to our coalition member. And so this has so many different benefits. I don't know about the county that you're in. In our county seat is Greenville, and it gets, all the attention. That's where the courthouse is and the hospital is and ECU is. And so by going out to all these smaller municipalities, we really make them feel included in the mission. And also, we're able to, the people that are attending these city council meetings in January are hearing about human trafficking and are learning about it. Number one, they will learn that it's a problem. And number two, they learn that, hey, there's a group here in our county that's working on it, that's working to solve it. So it's win-win. So that's just a suggestion. But again, we're not trying to really develop political clout as much as we are trying to educate our elected officials about roles they can play in addressing human trafficking. So the first question that you really need to ask yourself if you are thinking about starting a coalition is, does your community need one? And you would think at a Coalition Building 101 that I would be encouraging you, definitely go ahead and start one. And if your community needs one, I want you to start one. But as we go through, I'm going to talk to you about how much work a coalition is, how much work starting and facilitating one is. And so you have to be really committed to it, number one. And number two, you need to be sure there is a need for it. So if you're talking about, you begin to think about the people that you think you would want to invite to participate. Now, what if all of those people are already a member of XYZ group that's already meeting? Would it be possible to find out if XYZ group would work with you to also address human trafficking? And, that would be a delicate negotiation, right? To talk to that group. And if you find out that they're really, they might be willing to give you 10 minutes at a meeting, but they really don't want to change their mission to include human trafficking. And that's okay. That group might be really focused on what its purpose is and wants to stay that way, and that's okay. Um, so maybe you do need a separate group. Perhaps you could do something like plan your meetings right after their meetings. If all these people are already going to be there from 9 to 10 on Thursdays, could your meeting be at that same location from 10 to 11? So that since all the folks are there, that they wouldn't really have to plan another meeting. So that's just a thought, but you really do want to think about that. They're probably busy folks. They probably have a lot of meetings to go to. Can you get them engaged enough, or is there another way to engage them that doesn't involve a whole other coalition? Just something you want to think about. I'm going to stop for just a second and see if we have any questions. And I was going to go to chat and see. All right. So, what is the purpose of this potential coalition that we're thinking about starting? And that is something for those of you um, who had signed up early. I sent out some handouts, and like I said, I'll be getting those to the rest of you. So that was in some of the handouts that I sent you. What are you envisioning that the purpose of this group is going to be? And that is something that you need to have, written down and have really thought about before you ask people to start joining you in creating a coalition, right? You've got to be really clear on what it is you want to do. The other thing is from the very beginning, you need to think about the organization and the facilitation of it. And I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm just going to be totally transparent. When I started, so when I had the idea to start the Pitt County Coalition, the model for it was the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, which our nonprofit had been a member of since we were created. And that group met and continues to meet quarterly, and was a terrific networking opportunity. It brought all these different disciplines together to work on the issue of human trafficking, law enforcement and social workers and educators and universities and faith community, and just brought all these people together from across the state that I could learn from. And they'd bring speakers in from other statewide groups that were related, like the Child Advocacy Centers of North Carolina, or other groups that intersect with human trafficking. And I got a lot of benefit from that. And I thought, if we could recreate this on a local level, I think we could really engage local communities and they could really benefit from it. So that was where my thought process was. And so once I decided to do it, just started calling people and saying, here's what I want to do. I want to engage different organizations and agencies in our community on the issue of human trafficking. Are you willing to consider that? Would you come to a meeting to talk about it? Okay. And I'm giving you the benefit of my experience and saying, really, what you need to do from the beginning is think about how it's going to be organized. Who's going to lead it? Who's going to facilitate and maintain it? Because what happened in my case, since I just jumped in, I didn't really have a core group. It was just me going all gung ho. So our nonprofit continues to be the folks in charge of facilitating and maintaining the Pitt County Coalition. Um, Whereas it would be more effective if we had a core group of leadership. And so, what I would encourage you is if you are thinking about starting a coalition, that you recruit a core group of people who are going to share these responsibilities with you so that it doesn't all fall on you or on your organization. And then, when you move forward, facilitating and maintaining it, again, having that core group or a steering committee, but have a plan so that it doesn't all depend upon you. Now, I talked just a moment ago about being sure you have a purpose and figuring out what that purpose is from the beginning. Um, as you figure out what your purpose is, that's the time too to begin to think about, well, how would you measure success? So you figure out your purpose, so you set some goals so that you can achieve your purpose. How are you going to know whether or not you have achieved the goals? So you need to figure out early on how you're going to measure success. So, for instance, is success having 20 coalition members that attend regularly? Is success being sure that every school staff person in your service area has been trained in how to recognize human trafficking? Or that all of your municipalities proclaim January as Human Trafficking Awareness Month, or that there is adequate shelter in your community for human trafficking victims, that there's wraparound provision, service provision for victims. So, I mean, it will depend on what your goals are, how you're going to measure success. But you, from early on, you need to figure out what that's going to look like. Now, here is the most important part, is who do you invite to the table? And then as soon as after we determine who to invite to the table, then we're going to talk about how to invite them to the table, which is equally important. So would some of y'all put in the chat box who, if you were starting today, anti-human trafficking coalition, who would you invite? Put that in the chat box. We have such a shy group today. Law enforcement and DSS. Thank you, Chandler. Perfect. Those are generally the first two that we think about when we're thinking about an anti-human trafficking coalition. And Odette says organizations that align with the mission and provide diverse services, certainly as well. Great. Great. So we are going to look at some different disciplines that we are going to want to invite. And I'm just going to put several of these up here. So legal services and judicial system professionals. So I mentioned, for instance, that legal aid is one of ours, and there may be other, there's one in Wake and Durham County, I think, called Justice Matters, that help people, indigent folks with legal issues, and that's an important service to be able to offer human trafficking victims. The judicial system definitely needs to be trained and engaged. Medical professionals are in a unique position to be able to identify and serve human trafficking victims, so they certainly need to be at the table. The district attorney, we may have terrific law enforcement that's out there, investigating and charging human traffickers, but if your local DA won't prosecute them, that's a big gap. So you need to be sure that they're on board and that the DA and the law enforcement are working together. I mentioned legal aid, the Sexual Assault Center and the Domestic Violence Center. you know, the intersectionality between DVSA and human trafficking is huge. And so you certainly need to have them as your partners. The Child Advocacy Center, as I imagine most of you know, primarily addresses child sexual abuse. And we know that is just an incredible indicator for future exploitation, sexual exploitation in particular. So that they certainly need to be involved. And of course, as we said, law enforcement. So these are some of the disciplines that we would encourage you to invite to the table. Here are some others: your local community colleges and university, the faith community, economic development and private sector, um, agriculture. We tend to think so much when we're talking about human trafficking, we talk often about sex trafficking. But here in North Carolina, well, and just about everywhere, labor trafficking is just as important. And agriculture, of course, is a big part of that for our state, although that is certainly not the only industry in which labor trafficking occurs. Having your city and county managers involved, or if they're not able to have them send a representative would be great to have that local government involvement. The public health department. We believe firmly that human trafficking is a public health issue. And having them involved, having their employees know how to screen for human trafficking and how to refer to services is huge. If you are a public health person or a medical person, I want to share with you that there is a coalition called Heal Trafficking, HEAL Trafficking, that their tagline is because human trafficking is a public health issue. And so I would encourage you to just Google them. And if you are in those disciplines, they can help you find ways to be more involved. And of course, DSS. We know that any minor who is found to be in the commercial sex industry is automatically a victim of human trafficking, and DSS is to be called. And I mean, that's by statute here in North Carolina. So they need to be at the table and need to be a part of the community engagement around that issue. So we've talked a lot about the different disciplines. How about the actual skill set of people who need to be involved with a coalition? So I'm going to start at the top. Someone who's good at organization certainly would be a good person to have. Someone who can lead good meetings. And some people just don't have that gift, y'all. And I think we've all been to meetings that are led by people like that. It needs to be someone who can, keep things moving, who allows people time to talk, but will keep things moving so you can get through the agenda and end at a reasonable time as well. We need people who can follow instructions, people who can be cheerleaders, people who can handle conflict productively. This is a big one: speaking truth to power. So, and this has been an issue in many communities where leadership in the community does not want to believe that human trafficking is happening. Okay. Or they say that, yes, we have a prostitution problem. And they don't want to understand that prostitution is very often synonymous with sex trafficking. And so someone who has the capacity to speak truth to, for instance, the local elected officials, but also, it may be the sheriff, it may be the police chief that need to understand this so that they can get their staff trained. So you need people who are bold, um, but diplomatic and able to speak truth to power. You need folks who can build on what unites us. And remember what I said initially: the things that divide you, leave those at the door. Your coalition should focus on what your coalition's issue is, and the things that divide you need to be left out. You need folks who can facilitate complex discussions and think inclusively. So a few other skills you might want to look for. people who can think logically, creatively, and strategically. And those are usually not going to be the same people, right? But you need all of them at the table. People who can inspire us to act, people who use humor appropriately. Sometimes when things get tense, the best thing we can do is to have a laugh and to be able to laugh at ourselves. We need people who understand the way things are. And I want to clarify that I don't mean that for the purposes of saying, oh, we've always done it this way, we're not going to change. But what I mean is people who have been in the community long enough that they have a perspective, maybe a historical perspective on why things are the way they are. If, there are communities in which, maybe the mayor and a nonprofit leader have had a dispute. And so that personal dispute turns into a dispute between the town and that nonprofit. Or, that there are just historical reasons why this group and that group don't interact, that kind of thing. And you have to understand that. You need to hear that historical perspective before you can figure out ways to change that. So understanding that the way things are can be really important. You need people who can speak multiple languages. So, well, I would ask how many of your coalitions have that, but many of you are in the thinking process, so you may not have a coalition yet. Can think or can plan our fiscal health. Now, our coalition does not really, we don't have any staff. It's all volunteer. We're the main ones that do the facilitating of it. We have a little bit of money that got donated, like, $230 or something that has been donated for supplies that can be given to human trafficking survivors if they have a small need, if they need some diapers or whatever, we can use that funds for. But if you are an organization that's going to charge dues or hire a moderator or facilitator, then of course you're going to have someone to be in charge of the money. And we all need people who are willing to reflect and learn. And I'll use the example again of people being willing to sort of change their perspective, begin to understand that I'll use the issue of prostitution again. I hear people say that, that person chose to be in prostitution. It's their choice. They can made their bed, they can lie in it. But someone that's open-minded enough to hear that, prostitution is very rarely a choice. It's a lack of choice. And can we talk about, what things, what circumstances, what structures in our society led this person to be in prostitution, and what can we do to change that? And likewise with labor trafficking, many of the labor trafficking victims in our state are people that came here from another country. And, there's this perception among some people that, they're lazy, they're not willing to work, they're committing crimes, they're causing problems, when really, all the evidence about immigrant workers is what hard workers they are, and that they just want to make a living for themselves and their families. And so, being able to work with people to change perspectives can be huge. So what are some other skills that would be valuable to have? And so what you'll want to be doing is you're thinking, a moment ago, we looked at all the different disciplines that we'd like to have represented. So you're thinking about, okay, well, I need a social worker. Can I find a social worker that has some of these characteristics? Or I need someone in law enforcement. Can I find one that has these characteristics? So that's kind of the thinking process that you want to be going through as you are considering who to invite to the table. So if part of what you're doing is going to be political, then you're going to want to invite political strategists. Most of us that are in a coalition are wanting to create a change of some type, so you're going to want change makers. This next one may seem a little confusing, gatekeepers. Because, just a moment ago, I said, we want to be all inclusive, right? So why do we need a gatekeeper? Couple of reasons. One is that as I mentioned earlier, we need to stay very focused on what our issue is. And so we don't want people coming in and trying to change what our mission is or distract us from our mission. So that would be one thing that we want to be careful about. And the other thing I mentioned early on too is about information and knowledge sharing. And with the issue of human trafficking, there is a lot of bad information out there, myths about human trafficking that those of us that have been working in it for years are trying to correct all the time. And so we've got to be sure that if there is someone in the community that is spreading incorrect information about our issue, that we make sure that one apple doesn't spoil our whole coalition, right? That our coalition is the group that is spreading correct information out there. We want to invite people who are decision makers in their own organization so that they can help us move our agenda forward. Um, we want people who enjoy planning special events. If we need to raise money for something, we're going to need fundraisers, sanity checkers. So we don't want to get into groupthink, right? Where someone comes up with an idea and nobody's giving it a whole lot of thought and the group just runs with it. And you need someone to say, wait a second, have you thought about X? So we need someone that's willing to call us out when we get carried away. We need folks that are willing to be accountable to the coalition and folks that are willing to follow up, that if they make a commitment, they're going to follow through on it. So again, as you're thinking about people to invite, you don't need to have a list of these skills you want and a list of these disciplines, right? We need to think about lawyers who have these characteristics and people from the university who have these characteristics so that you're inviting people that can meet the needs of the coalition. So one thing you'll need to consider as you are considering whether or not you want to create a coalition is what geographic area that will cover. For our area, it was just easy. We just decided to make it Pitt County. It's a kind of a hub for the area that we're in. It's surrounded by a lot of rural counties. We just decided to make it one county. Now, if you're in an area, maybe a more rural area, you might need to have several counties just to have enough agencies and resources, to form a coalition. So that might be something you want to think about. Do you want it to just be for a particular town? Or if you are in a large enough city to have large enough neighborhood, you could do it by neighborhood. But think about that, and not to say this isn't something that could change as your coalition grows. You may grow to include other geographic areas, or you may have a spinoff group. That would be a possibility. Something I would encourage you to think about if you're going to have multiple counties is where you're going to meet, when we can meet again. Because you're not going to want to have one place where you have to meet. If you got like 4 different counties, you're probably going to want to move that around from county to county every time you meet, so that it'll be, it's not convenient for me this month or quarter, but it'll be convenient for me next quarter, so that it's fair. What does the table look like? Do we have all the ethnicities of our community represented in our coalition? And that's important to be sure that everybody's represented. So if you are in a county that has a high Native American population, for instance, there probably are organizations that focus on providing services to that population, and they certainly would need to be invited to the table. And likewise with, Hispanic or Asian American, if you are in a county that is, 50-50 African American and Caucasian, are your coalition members fairly close to 50-50 represented? So, and sometimes this can be hard. I mean, I get that, but it's something to work toward. It's a goal to be sure that all the ethnicities in a community are represented in your coalition. So our coalition needs a diversity of experience, life experience. And so I mentioned earlier that having, longtime residents can be really valuable for the historical perspective of why things are how they are. But newcomers certainly bring just a breath of fresh air and can bring new ideas. I mean, they can say, we did this back in the town I lived in before, and it really worked well. And if we can adapt it, it might work here. So they can bring in new ideas that can be great. Um, if you've got a significant population of immigrants in your community, certainly they need to be at the table. Um, you want to be diverse in terms of gender and gender identity, in terms of religion, spiritual faith. And, if you are a coalition, anti-human trafficking coalition, certainly you want survivors of human trafficking to feel comfortable at the table, and you want to invite them to the table. So I am going to stop here for just a second before we get to how do we invite them. And I was just going to check in chat, see if we had any questions. Let's see, Odette sharing that she was aware of a case where a prosecutor refused to prosecute. And that's an issue, and that's not a localized issue. That's for anyone who, for instance, is familiar with the Jeffrey Epstein case. Both the local prosecutor and the U.S. attorney that was supposed to prosecute that case, both of them failed miserably at their jobs. They were just blinded by who he was. So, how do we invite potential members? Can you all put in the chat box, if you were going to start a coalition today and you had a list of 10 people you wanted to invite, tell me how you would invite them. Put it in the chat box, please. Inform them of the mission. Sure. Tell them your mission and what you feel they could contribute to it, certainly. So I think it would be important when you make that initial contact to do two things. To tell them, you want them to feel needed. So you want to tell them how you believe they could benefit the coalition, but you also want to tell them how the coalition will benefit them and in their work, so that it's a two-way street. So I don't think I did a good job of phrasing my question, because what I really meant is, how are you going to make contact with them? How do you go about making that contact? And so we're going to look at ways to do that. And you can see we're starting with the least effective here at the bottom. Putting up a poster and a flyer is throwing out a big net, right? But when we just went through, we're looking for some really specific people. So putting up a flyer and saying we're having a coalition meeting is inclusive, and it's okay to do that, but that's not the way to get the DA there, right? You're going to have to contact the DA personally. So mass mailings, another one, not terribly effective at getting the right people there. Personal letters might work. Our society, we're not used to getting personal letters anymore, are we? The email listserv. So how many of you, if you got an email blast from someone you didn't know, inviting you to a coalition meeting. And it sounds like it's for a good cause, okay? But it's from a person you don't know, you've never had any contact with them, and they're asking you to a meeting. Are you going to go? Not likely, unless it's just an issue you are all about, right? Personal email to invitation, maybe. I'm getting a little closer. If they address me by name as somebody I know, possibly. Phone calls, face-to-face meeting. So, ideal, of course, is the face-to-face meeting. And in our environment right now, that's not always possible. What I always do is call someone and ask for an appointment. But if I can't get an appointment, to at least talk to them on the phone, make a personal contact. Now, we also know in this day and age that very often what we have to do is leave a voicemail. And so what I encourage you is, before you pick up the phone, have written down what it is you want them to do. If it's come to a meeting, why, what are we going to do at this meeting, and how this coalition will benefit them and why we need them on the coalition. So have that written down so that you can leave a voicemail. And at the end of the voicemail, say, I'm going to send you more information by email, and follow up your voicemail with email. And, chances are good they're busy people and they're not going to return your call, and you're going to have to call them again. So just be aware that it takes persistence to get the people that you need there. Sending out an email blast to all of the movers and shakers in your community is not going to get people to the table. You are going to have to contact them personally. And if you've been wise and followed the suggestion I made earlier, and you have a core group that's all working together to start this coalition, then you can divide these people up and everybody calls 10 people and you're good. And follow up with those people, right? So this is your best practice, is to try for a face-to-face meeting. If you can't, talk to them by phone and follow up. Now, there is a place for the email listserv once your coalition has been established, and once you have consistent members, then you can do what I do, which is send out these email reminders. Hey, we're meeting this Thursday. But when I become aware of new people that we want to invite to the coalition, then I understand just sending them an email is not going to cut it. Then I or another member, someone's going to have to contact that person personally and invite them. So just be aware. So what should happen at our very first meeting? You want that first meeting to get up on the right foot, right? You want to start on time. You do not want to waste their time. I would suggest something to do is to have a speaker come in from a similar coalition that's operating successfully, and to share the things that they're able to do now because they've formed a coalition, how they're impacting their community. If you decide to do this, you're welcome to contact me. I can speak to your group, or I can suggest someone else who could speak to your group. And you want to give them a reason to come back. At that first meeting, once you've had a discussion about what it is you all want to do as a coalition, kind of get on the same page, have the speaker who's talked about the things that their organization's been able to accomplish, and that get everybody's wheels turning about, hey, what are some things we might be able to do? We need to come back and talk about this. Before they leave, be sure you've got a date, time, and place. Maybe the group needs to talk about, a convenient time for all of them that are present. But before they leave, have a date, time, and place. Do not say we'll email you with that. You need to have that established before they leave. And then you can send it out to the people who were interested but couldn't come to this meeting. Hopefully they can make the next one. You want to tell them, if you've got a speaker for the next meeting, who that is. Have y'all already started talking about planning an event? Did you agree to do something? Who's going to follow up and make sure that that gets done? How often are y'all going to meet? Some groups, some coalitions that I'm aware of only meet quarterly. Ours meets monthly. I personally like meeting monthly because it's good for continuity and for networking and for the resource sharing. But if you're in a community, like I mentioned before, where all these people have so many different meetings, then you may need to cut it down to quarterly. It'll depend on what the needs of your individual community is. And where will you meet? And just, think about things like parking. We meet at a library when we're able to meet, and, it's a free space and there's plenty of parking. Sometimes, a university campus might be willing to give you free space, but the parking is going to be an issue. So you just need to think about things like that. And again, as I mentioned, if it's a multi-county coalition, then you're probably going to need to change your locations. But I still recommend keeping your time and date consistent, even if you have to move your location. I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions or comments before we move on. There we go. Sometimes it just doesn't come up. Posting in groups, I think that's a good idea. I think a personal connection is going to be better, but it certainly can't hurt to post it in like-minded groups. If you could get, for instance, if you've got a domestic violence group meeting, ask them to announce, say, we're starting a human trafficking coalition. Here's the date and time for that. So that might be a way to get some people there. So I have mentioned to you throughout this presentation, I've given as an example the Pitt County Coalition Against Human Trafficking. And, I want to be clear that I'm not saying it's the greatest coalition ever, but it's obviously the one that I have the most intimate experience about and can share with you how it developed and the things that we do. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. And I'm going to suggest too, if you would like, if you're not a part of a local coalition and you'd sort of like to see what one is working like, especially during these COVID times, you are welcome to join us tomorrow. We are meeting via Zoom tomorrow at 9:30, and I can send out to you this afternoon the Zoom link, just to kind of see how our meetings flow and see, if there's anything you could take from that would be helpful to you. We do meet at a consistent time and place normally. And we still do. Now it's just Zoom instead of the library. I do feel that our coalition has been successful in several regards. We have a strong victim response in our community. When one service provider has a need that can't be met by their organization, they know the other coalition members that they can reach out to, and we've been able to fill in the gaps in service provision. As I mentioned, we do have two main campaigns during the year in terms of awareness events that I think have been really beneficial for our community and does engage the community in the movement. Especially the one, like I mentioned, where we go out to the city council meetings and engage some areas of the community that are not as involved usually. We know at least once a year they're hearing the message and have the opportunity to be engaged. So here are some pictures from, this is during January, during Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we've got the Pitt County county manager and commissioners presenting us with the signed proclamation. We've got the Greenville City mayor there, the Farmville mayor, and another mayor I don't recall right offhand. So we are working with local governments and local elected officials. One thing that we do work at, as I mentioned, is trying to bring in good speakers, and they don't have to be, sometimes they are local. They might be from intersectional organizations, like I mentioned, substance abuse, that kind of thing. And these two speakers, the one on the right is Caitlin Ryland. She is the supervising attorney for the farm worker unit of legal aid. So she came and talked to us about labor trafficking, and specifically within the farm worker community. So often our groups focus on sex trafficking. So it's really important that we educate our coalition members about labor trafficking and how to look for it and how to serve those victims as well. The person on the left is Beverly Weeks. She's the executive director of Cry Freedom Missions out of Goldsboro. And she came in and shared about different services they offer. And specifically, one thing they do is go into jails and offer classes and develop relationships with human trafficking survivors while they're in jail, so that when they come out, they can offer them services, help them get jobs, help them finish their education, so that they are not pulled back into the given trafficking situation. So that's just a beautiful ministry that they do. They also go into hotels and motels and take gift baskets to people working in the commercial sex industry there, and just try to, again, develop those relationships. So we share this kind of these kinds of speakers with our coalition. As a result of the fact that our coalition has been around for 4 years and has been really active in the community, we do get some fairly good press from both our local newspaper and television stations. And I mention that because when our coalition receives press, then that is just educating our community even more. Two things: it's telling them we've got human trafficking here, and it's telling them there's a group that's working on it. And so that awareness is huge, is very valuable to what we're trying to do. So I have talked you through things you need to think about if you are considering beginning a coalition in your community. And I provided you with some tools. One thing that I sent out is the vision, mission, and goals of the Pitt County Coalition. Again, they're not going to be, the same for your community, but it just gives you something to look at, something to start from if you need that, just to start the wheels turning on things you might consider. I also sent out to you a tool that Margaret Henderson from the UNC School of Government developed. And it can be used in two ways. It's one thing, it says, it's a how are we doing tool if you've already got a coalition. But if you don't have one, then it can give you a lot of things to think about. As you consider, if you're going to start one, how you want to go about that. So that's why I included that. And then I gave you just a really simple worksheet that you can fill out with, hopefully, a core group that's going to work together with you if you decide to start a coalition. What would be a good name for it? What geographic region will we serve? Who do we want to invite? And, space there for you to include that, to just begin to get those wheels turning. So I know that I have kind of gone through quickly, but I wanted to give you my email address here. You are welcome to contact me with questions. As I said, I'm going to send out this afternoon to you all those handouts I just mentioned, plus the slides to this, as well as the recording here. And you are welcome to reach back out to me if I can assist you in any way with starting a coalition, or maybe your coalition has been around for a while and needs kind of a revamp, needs some re-energizing, as we talked about. And what are some things that we might be able to do to assist you for that. Um, so I'm just looking in the chat to see if anyone had any questions. I see that Odetta shared her website. And I'm going to go to the Q&A now and see if there are any questions there. Please feel free if you have questions or if you have a comment, if you've got some experience with the coalition of your own that you would like to share, please feel free to unmute yourself and share with us. I really do appreciate all of you that have come today, and I hope that if you are considering um, starting a coalition, that this has given you some food for thought. Um, Certainly wasn't meant to be discouraging at all, but full transparency, I want you to know that it is a lot of work and that there are a lot of things you can think about on the front end that can really help you moving forward. Some things that I didn't realize that I could or should have done initially. So I'm wanting to, like I said, sort of share share the information that I got through blood, sweat, and tears, um, so that you don't have to go through all that. So thank you, Kiera. I appreciate your kind words. If no one has any questions, I am going to end our time together, and I will send out the email in a little bit with all those resources. Again, please reach out if I can assist you with anything, and I appreciate you being here. Have a great day.